السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله رب العالمين وأفضل الصلاة وأتم التسليم على سيدنا رسول الله وعلى آله وصحبه وسلم أجمعين. Welcome back everyone to Tafsir Surah Al-A'raf, Heights of the Hereafter. We are here for class 11. So just next week is going to be the last class for this semester. So really excited to begin today's class because again, it's one of my favorite personal parts of the surah, which is talking about the prophets of God that were sent to various former nations. So with that, let's look at Surah Al-A'raf, verse number 73, which is where we had left off. Okay, so please turn to verse number 73. بعد أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. وإلى ثمود أخاهم صالحا قال يا قوم اعبدوا الله ما لكم من إله غيره قد جاءتكم بينة من ربكم هذه ناقة الله لكم آية فذروها تأكل في أرض الله ولا تمسوها بسوء فيأخذكم عذاب أليم. Verse number 73, and I think Juwayriya will or Zahra will put that up. And to Thamud we sent forth their brother Salih. He said to them, O my people, serve Allah, you have no other God than He. Truly there has come to you a clear proof from your Lord. This is a she-camel from Allah, a divine portent for you. So leave her alone to pasture on Allah's earth and touch her with no evil lest a painful punishment should overtake you. Okay, so this is verse number 73 where we have the first mention in this surah of the Thamud and their prophet Salih alayhi salam, who was sent to these people. And for your information, Salih alayhi salam is actually mentioned 9 times in the Quran, and of course he brought the same message of Tawheed as the former prophets. The people of Thamud are also called Ashabul Hijr, the people of the rocky tract. Is one way that Al-Hijr is translated. So basically, they're the same people. You have this in chapter 15, Surah Al-Hijr, verse 80, which means, and verily the dwellers of Al-Hijr denied the messengers. Okay, so that is also a reference to the same people, the people of Thamud or the people of Al-Hijr. Now, Ibn Kathir, rahimahullah ta'ala, he mentions in his tafsir how these people of the Thamud were from the ancient Arabs before the time of Ibrahim alayhi salam. So thereafter Ad, there is Thamud, after that is Ibrahim alayhi salam, and then you will have the people of Madian. And why are we mentioning the people of Madian, to whom Shu'aib alayhi salam was sent? Because he is also one of the prophets we will shortly meet in this surah, inshallah. So the people of Thamud, they resided between the Hijaz, which is the western part of the Arabian Peninsula, and Sham, which is greater Syria. So today Syria is just that country, but historically Sham referred to greater Syria, which included Syria, Palestine, or Jordan, etc. And so this is where they lived, in the southeastern part of this locality, and they are known by this name Al-Hijr as well. And it is very interesting to note that Ar-Rasul sallallahu alaihi wasallam actually passed by the habitations of the people of Thamud in the 9th year of the Hijrah on his way from Medina to Tabuk. Remember Ghazwat al-Tabuk, the expedition to Tabuk was one that Rasul sallallahu alaihi wasallam himself participated in, and he passed by the habitation of the people of Thamud. Even now you can see the stony buildings in this locality that they have carved out of the mountains, spread over thousands of acres of land, and its capital is called Madain al-Salih, okay, because it was of course Salih alayhi salam that was sent to this location. Now, I wanted to just say a few words about the Thamud and who they were and what they did. Mawdudi rahimahullah ta'ala mentions in his tafhim that at the time of our Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, the trading caravans used to pass through the archaeological remains of the Thamud. And Ibn Kathir mentions a saying of Ibn Umar radiyallahu anh, that he said, what means when the Messenger of Allah sallallahu alaihi wasallam went to the area of Al-Hijr in Tabuk with the people, yani to the land of Thamud, He camped near the homes of Thamud in Al-Hijr, and the people brought water from the wells that the Thamud used to use before. They used that water to make dough and place the pots on fire for cooking. However, the Prophet ﷺ commanded them to spill the contents of the pots and to give the dough to the camels. He then marched forth with them from that area to another area near the well that the camel used to drink from. And we're going to talk about why this camel is so important. He, Rasul sallallahu pointed to the well that the she-camel that was sent as a miracle to the people of Thamud. He pointed out that well that it used to drink from, and he told his companions to only drink from that well that the camel had drunk from. I'm going to ask admin to please mute everyone. Jazakallah khair. So he ﷺ forbade his people, his companions, to enter the dwellings of those that had been divinely punished, and he told them rather not to drink from the wells that the people of Thamud used to drink from. There's another narration in the Sahih of Imam al-Bukhari where Abdullah bin Umar radiallahu anh narrates that while we were going for the battle of Tabuk and we reached the places of the dwellers of Al-Hijr, Allah's Rasul said about those people, do not enter the residences of these people unless you enter weeping. But if you weep not, then do not enter them, lest you be afflicted with what they were afflicted with. Okay, so this is the meaning of how he forbade them from entering their habitations. If we cannot muster up the sensitivity and the awareness of the punishment that befell these people who had rejected their messenger, if we cannot enter in a state of weeping and remembering that, then we should not enter that place at all. Now, what Salih alayhi salam says here, which is a little bit different from when Nuh alayhi salam spoke to his people, as we saw last week, and Hud alayhi salam spoke to his people, right? So here what Salih alayhi salam says is that a bayyina has come to you from your Lord. Okay, so we didn't see this particular word used with the previous prophets in this surah so far. But he says, Salih alayhi salam says that a bayyina has come to you from your Lord. What is that bayyina? What does bayyina mean? A clear proof or a clear miracle, which was actually the she-camel. We're going to explain exactly how that happened. And it was something that was miraculously brought forth by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and the way it was brought forth, as we'll see, shows that it was a clear proof, a miracle clearly from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And in fact, as you can see in the verse that we just cited, it's called Naqatullah, right? That it is the she-camel. Naqa is the she-camel, right? A female camel. So this is the Naqatullah. It is ascribed to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So this shows the extra honor that is being given to this camel. Anything that is ascribed to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala becomes elevated and honored because of that ascription. For example, Baytullah, the house of Allah, the Kaaba, is honored by being ascribed to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Rasulullah, the Rasul, the messenger of Allah, immediately it elevates the messenger sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So this shows how special and important this camel was and how it was supposed to be treated because of its nature. Ibn Kathir explains, indeed, there has come to you a clear sign from your Lord. This she-camel of Allah is a sign to you. Yani a miracle has come to you from Allah, testifying to the truth I came to you with. I referring to Salih alayhi salam. Okay, so he's addressing his people. This is the explanation Ibn Kathir gives for the way that Salih alayhi salam interacts with his people. What had happened is that Salih alayhi salam's people had asked him to produce a miracle and suggested a certain solid rock that they chose, which stood lonely in the area of Hijr. Okay, so it's this lonesome rock, and it was called Al-Katiba. It actually had a name. They asked him to bring a pregnant she-camel out of that stone. Salih alayhi salam took their covenant and promises that if Allah answers their challenge, they would believe and follow him. When they gave their oaths and promises to that, Salih alayhi salam started praying and invoking Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to produce that miracle. All of a sudden, the stone moved and broke apart, producing a she-camel with thick wool. Thick wool. It was pregnant and its fetus was visibly moving in its belly. Subhanallah, exactly what Salih alayhi salam's people had asked of him. This is when their chief, Jundub bin Amr, and several who followed him believed. Okay, so they actually became Muslim. The rest of the noblemen of Thamud wanted to believe as well, but Dhu'ab bin Amr bin Labid and Al-Habab, who tended their idols, and Rabab stopped them. One of the cousins of Jundub bin Amr, remember, who just became Muslim, and so he had a cousin by the name of Shihab, and he was also one of the leaders of Thamud. He also wanted to accept the message like his cousin had. However, the chiefs, whom we mentioned, prevented him, and he conceded, and he gave in to their promptings, and so did not believe. The camel remained in Thamud as well as its offspring after she delivered those offspring in front of them. The camel used to drink from the well on one day and leave the well for Thamud the next day. So the day that the camel drank from the well, the people of Thamud were not allowed to drink from the well. They had to drink the following day. They also used to drink its milk. For on the days she drank water, they used to milk her and fill their containers with milk. If you want to find more details about the bayina, the clear sign that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had sent, we can actually look to other verses of the Quran. For example, we have in chapter 26, verse number 155, هَذِهِ نَاقَةٌ لَهَا شِرْبٌ وَلَكُمْ شِرْبُ يَوْمٍ مَعْلُومٍ, where Salih alayhi salam, addressing his people, says, here is a she-camel. It has a right to drink water, and you have a right to drink water each day. So they had a turn system going. Ibn Kathir continues that the camel used to graze in some of their valleys, going through a pass and coming out through another pass. And it's very interesting, when I was looking at the tafsir of Mawdudi rahimahullah ta'ala, he writes that when the Rasul sallallahu alaihi wasallam had passed by the Thamud dwellings, he pointed out the pass that the camel actually used to come through, and it's still called Fajjun Naqa till this day, which literally means the pass of the Naqa. She did that so as to be able to move easily, because she used to drink a lot of water. She was a tremendous animal that had a strikingly beautiful appearance. She used to pass by their cattle, and the cattle was actually afraid of her. Okay, so Ash-Shu'ara, again, tafsir of the Quran, through the Quran, we can look also at Surah Ash-Shu'ara verses 154 and 155, which tells us how the people of Thamud are now reacting to the message of Salih alayhi salam. How are they treating and perceiving Salih alayhi salam? Well, they said to him, مَا أَنْتَ إِلَّا بَشَرٌ مِثْلُنَا فَأْتِ بِآيَةٍ إِن كُنْتَ مِنَ الصَّادِقِينَ قَالَ هَذِهِ نَاقَةٌ لَهَا شَرْبٌ وَلَكُمْ شَرْبُ يَوْمٍ مَعْلُومٍ. So we have already mentioned this ayah previously, and the one before that, which is 154, is the reaction, the initial reaction of the people of Thamud when Salih alayhi salam brought his message. They said, you are only a human being like us, so bring forth a sign if what you say is true. So then, this was the sign that was brought forth. Now let's see what happens after this. Let's look at verse number 74. واذكروا إذ جعلكم خلفاء من بعد عاد وبوأكم في الأرض تتخذون من سهولها قصورا وتنحتون الجبال بيوتا فاذكروا آلاء الله ولا تعثوا في الأرض مفسدين. Okay, so you have here verse number 74. Here this is Salih alayhi salam speaking to his people. What is he saying? And call to mind when after Ad he made you the successors and gave you power in the earth, so that you took for yourself palaces in its plains and hewed out dwellings in the mountains. Remember then the wondrous bounties of Allah, and do not go about creating mischief in the land. Okay, so you have here verse number 74. So, after this great sign, was brought to the people of Thamud, Salih alayhi salam is further telling them to remember their blessings, everything that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has favored them with, how He made them inherit the land after the people of Ad, right? And established them So they had these palaces in the plains, and they had these dwellings carved out of the mountains. One the tafsir mentions that one they used for the summer and the other they used for the winter. So remember the divine blessings of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and don't go strutting about in the land and spreading corruption, something that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala hates. Okay. Now, let's look at the reaction of the mala. Remember, if we've been paying attention from last week, mala is that a set of leaders or clan elders, the powerful people that are in charge of the community. What is their reaction? Well, you see in verse number 75, قَالَ مَلَأُ الَّذِينَ اسْتَكْبَرُوا مِنْ قَوْمِهِ لِلَّذِينَ اسْتُضْعِفُوا لِمَنْ آمَنَ مِنْهُمْ أَتَعْلَمُونَ أَنَّ صَالِحًا مُرْسَلٌ مِنْ رَبِّهِ قَالُوا إِنَّا بِمَا أُرْسِلَ بِهِ مُؤْمِنُونَ. Okay, so here now is the conversation actually between the mala, the haughty chiefs and elders, leaders of the tribe or the people of Thamud. They are beginning to have a conversation with those that had actually believed, those that had become Muslim from among the weak and the poor. So what do they ask about? They ask about the risala, about the prophethood of Salih alayhi salam. Verse 75, translation, the haughty elders of his nation said to those believers who had been oppressed, do you know that Salih is one sent forth with a message from his Lord? They replied, surely we believe in the message with which he has been sent. Okay. Unfortunately, we see the same plague of corruption blinding the eyes of the mala that we had spoken about previously. The rank of leadership itself lent them to kibr, lent them to being blinded to the truth. And they started questioning the poor. They started questioning the weak ones who had accepted the call of the Prophet Salih alayhi salam, and they're asking, do you in fact know that Salih has been sent as a prophet from his Lord? And so the people that had believed, although they were the weak ones, the oppressed ones, the poor ones, they were very open in their declaration of faith. They openly said that we are believers in that which we have been sent with. But unfortunately, the reaction of the mala is قَالَ الَّذِينَ اسْتَكْبَرُوا إِنَّا بِالَّذِي آمَنْتُمْ بِهِ كَافِرُونَ. The haughty ones remarked, most certainly we disbelieve in that which you have believed. Okay, so verse 76, this only emboldened them further. Just like, the believers were, they had courage, they found courage, subhanAllah, through their faith and declared it openly. Unfortunately, the mala were also emboldened in their kufr. So after hearing that declaration, they say, they also actively declared their kufr, that they were disbelievers in that which the Muslims had believed. So what is their next action? If they are openly declaring their animosity and their kufr, then what is going to be their next action? Well, it is the expected action that we find in verse number 77. فَأَقَرُوا النَّاقَةَ وَعَتَوْا عَنْ أَمْرِ رَبِّهِمْ وَقَالُوا يَا صَالِحُ ائْتِنَا بِمَا تَعِدُنَا إِن كُنْتَ مِنَ الْمُرْسَلِينَ. So here we have this, tragic reply, horrible reply from the people of Thamud. Then they hamstrung the she-camel, yani they slaughtered it. فَأَقَرُوا النَّاقَةَ, they slaughtered the camel, disdainfully disobeyed the commandment of their Lord, and said, listen to what they said, O Salih, bring upon us the scourge with which you threaten us if you are truly a messenger of Allah. This is their reaction here in verse number 77. They killed the camel, went against the command of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and then they basically said the same horrible thing that the people of Ad had said before they received the punishment. And what was that? Bring on the punishment. Bring it on, right? In verse 70 that we had covered last week, you can recall when Ad said what means, bring forth the punishment, or bring forth what you have threatened us with, if you indeed are min as-sadiqeen, from the truthful ones. They said this to Hud alayhi salam, right? Here, Thamud is saying to Salih alayhi salam, bring forth what you have threatened us with, if you indeed are one of the messengers of God, right? So the people of Salih, you can see they doubted the risala, they doubted the rank of prophethood of Salih alayhi salam, right? Min al-mursalin, if you were indeed from the messengers, then bring on the punishment. So you have min al-sadiqin, verse number 70, Aad said, bring on the punishment if you are truthful. Thamud said, bring on the punishment if indeed you are of the messengers. Slightly, the words are a little bit different, but the meaning, the point is essentially the same. They rejected both the message and the messenger and were audacious enough to openly ask for the scourge to be brought upon them, which it did in both cases. And there are horrible details that we have about what they did and then what happened to them. For example, the killing of the camel is mentioned, the she-camel is actually recorded in Ibn Kathir. And he says that Thamud's rejection of Salih became intense. They intended to kill her so that they could take the water for themselves every day. So this was actually one of the motivating factors that prompted them to kill the camel. They couldn't stand sharing the water supply with it. And of course, their kufr was, essentially the greatest motivation behind that action. Now, who was it that dared to kill this she-camel of Allah, right? The Naqatullah, who dared to actually commit that atrocious act after it was a miracle they themselves had demanded, after they themselves had given covenants and promises and oaths to Salih alayhi salam that we will believe. And they saw some of their people, in fact, believing after that. But then who is it that was the actual person that went on to kill the she-camel? Well, actually, we have some information on this directly from the Quran. There is in Surah An-Naml, verse 48, it talks about some individuals in that land, and this is how it describes them. Surah An-Naml, verse 48, وَكَانَ فِي الْمَدِينَةِ تِسْعَةُ رَهْطٍ يُفْسِدُونَ فِي الْأَرْضِ وَلَا يُصْلِحُونَ, referring to the people of Thamud. In that location, the verse says what means, and there were in the city 9 men who made mischief in the land and would not reform. Okay, so Ibn Kathir explains that by saying that these 9 men were chiefs of their people, and they lured the entire tribe into agreeing to kill the she-camel. So they waited until the camel left the water well, where Qudar, this is the man who led the charge. This is actually one of those instances where, there is a name mentioned with regards to who actually killed the camel. The books of Tafsir mention his name. His name is Qudar. He led the charge. He waited beside a rock in the path of the camel, and another man waited another rock, and that other second man was also one of the 9 men who created corruption in the land at that place. When the camel passed by the second man, he shot an arrow at the camel, which pierced her leg. Okay. When they finished the camel off and the news reached Salih alayhi salam, so obviously they initially wounded it and then they slaughtered it. And then this news reached Salih alayhi salam. He came to them while they were gathered. When he saw the camel, he cried and proclaimed. His statement is in Surah Hud, verse number 65. فَعَقَرُوهَا فَقَالَ تَمَتَّعُوا فِي دَارِكُمْ 3 أَيَّامٍ ذَلِكَ وَعْدٌ غَيْرُ مَكْذُوبٍ. But they killed her, so he warned them, you have only 3 more days to enjoy life in your homes. This is an unfailing promise. Now notice how it was said that all of them conspired to kill the camel, right? The translation of the verses, but they killed her, right? It doesn't say only 1 or 2 people or 9 people were the killers, but it says that all of them killed her, right? فَأَقَرُوهَا rather, but they killed her. It is because as we find in the tafsir, the designated killer of the camel, he had approached all of his people, including the women and children, it is reported, and found a general consensus. Everyone was in general agreement of wanting to kill this camel, okay? And we see this, in the Quran and other places too, like Surah Al-Shams. فَكَذَّبُوهُ فَعَقَرُوهَا فَدَمْدَمَ عَلَيْهِمْ رَبُّهُمْ بِذَنْبِهِمْ فَسَوَّاهَا. Then they denied him and they killed it. So it's all in the, plural sense, right? They were all responsible for the killing of this camel because they were all in on it. They had been approached with the proposal and they accepted it and agreed to it, right? So this verse, number 14 from Surah Al-Shams, then they denied him, yani Salih alayhi salam, and killed the she-camel. So their Lord destroyed them because of their sin and made them equal in destruction, right? They were all destroyed. So the big lesson, of course, here for us being that if you agree with the sin and are pleased with a sin, the person is considered just as guilty, even if they do not actually, are the ones with the dagger in their hand, right? If they're not the ones actually doing the final act of killing, but they're in agreement with it and are pleased with it, then they are considered full accomplices, deserving of punishment. This is exactly what happened to the people of Thamud, right? And this applies to all of us in any sin that we may not directly do, but if we think it's okay, it's, and we're pleased with it and we're happy with it and we're supportive of it, then this is something that is automatically giving us the sin as well, something we have to be really, really careful about. Okay, so let's look at verse number 78. What then happens to the people of Thamud after they do this horrible crime? Verse number 78, فَأَخَذَتْهُمُ الرَّجْفَةُ فَأَصْبَحُوا فِي دَارِهِمْ جَاثِمِينَ. So thereupon a shocking catastrophe seized them so that they lay prostrate in their dwellings. Okay, so the Arabic says فَأَخَذَتْهُمُ الرَّجْفَةُ. So they were seized by a rajfa. What is the rajfa here? It's translated as a shocking catastrophe. You'll find other meanings of it to refer to a terrifying, intense earthquake that overtook them and they lay prostrate in their dwellings and they fell over upon their chests after that horrible, shocking earthquake. You have in the Quran different names for what overtook the people of that overtook the people of Thamud, and other places in the Quran it's called sayha, which literally means a cry. So here we have a rajfa, the shocking catastrophe or earthquake is what it refers to. You also have the word sayha referring to what overtook the people of Thamud. And sayha means a cry. And Shaykh Zuhaili in his tafsir actually mentions that this cry, this horrible cry from the sky actually accompanied the terrible earthquake from the ground. So it was a horrible, overwhelming adhab or punishment that overtook them. Other places in the Quran refers to it as sa'iqa, which means a thunderbolt, or taghiya, which refers to a roaring noise or blast, right? For example, in Surah Al-Haqqa, verse 5 means as for Thamud, they were destroyed by an overwhelming blast, okay? Taghiya. So, this horrible fate, we actually have some details from Ibn Kathir, rahimahullah ta'ala, about the 9 wicked people, how they actually killed a camel on a Wednesday, he reports. And that night they conspired to kill Salih alayhi salam himself. And the reasoning behind this, now they've already killed the camel, now they are audacious enough to actually want to kill the Prophet himself, right? Salih alayhi salam himself. And their logic, the reasoning behind this was, if he is truthful, we should finish him before we are finished. If he is a liar, we will make him follow his camel. So again, this goes back to how we can justify, astaghfirullah, the human mind is capable of justifying anything, no matter how evil and atrocious it is. And this is how genocide happens, okay? Past and present. So look at verse Namal, verses 49 to 50. It actually has their evil conversation documented right in the Quran, in Surah An-Naml, verses 49 to 50. And I'll just read the translation. It means, and again, these are the 9 wicked, evil people from Thamud that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had identified, right, as the 9 people who used to make corruption and not do islah, right? What are they saying? They said, swear one to another by Allah that we shall make a secret night attack on him and his household, and thereafter we shall surely say to his relatives, to his near relatives, we witness not the destruction of his household, and verily we are telling the truth. So they plotted a plot, and we planned a plan while they perceived not. And of course, we is here Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala referring to himself, right? وَمَكَرُوا, and they planned, and of course Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala also planned while they perceived not. Ibn Kathir continues, when they conspired to kill Salih alayhi salam and gathered at night to carry out their plan, their plot, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, to whom belongs all might and who protects his messengers, rained down stones that smashed the heads of these 9 people before the rest of the tribe. Okay, so there's this additional element of punishment that the 9 people meet first before the rest of the tribe. Now remember, Salih alayhi salam had told them that you have 3 days after they killed the camel, right? He told them that you have 3 days of respite. So remember, Wednesday they had killed the camel. The tafsir mentions that on Thursday, the first of the 3 days of respite, the people woke up and their faces were yellow, just as Salih alayhi salam had promised them. This is all in Ibn Kathir, you can look it up. On the second day of respite, Friday, they woke up and they found their faces red. On the third day of respite, Saturday, they woke up with their faces black. Astaghfirullah. So on Sunday, what they did is that they wore the fragrance of hanut. Hanut is the perfume that is used on the dead. So it's part of the shrouding of the dead before burial. They did that. They knew it was coming. They just awaited Allah's punishment. They were ready. They knew that it was inevitable. It could not be escaped in any way. They did not know what would be done to them or how it would be done or where the torment would come from. When the sun rose, the sayha, the loud cry, came from the sky and a severe tremor overtook them from below. The souls were captured and the bodies remained lifeless all within an hour, is what is reported on that. And you find this right here, فَأَصْبَحُوا فِي دَارِهِمْ جَاثِمِينَ, right, in the same verse 78, that they lay prostrate and dead in their homes, completely dead and lifeless. No one was saved from the torment. It was completely overwhelming and took everyone. Okay, now Salih alayhi salam is of course left, and he is saved. He is saved with his people. So with those the few that had believed. So in verse number 79, we see what Salih alayhi salam says, فَتَوَلَّ عَنْهُمْ وَقَالَ يَا قَوْمِ لَقَدْ أَبْلَغْتُكُمْ رِسَالَةَ رَبِّي وَنَصَحْتُ لَكُمْ وَلَكِنْ لَا تُحِبُّونَ النَّاصِحِينَ. Right? Verse number 79, and Salih left them saying, O my people, I conveyed to you the message of my Lord and gave you good advice, but you have no liking for your well-wishers. Okay, so these are the departing words that Salih alayhi salam says to them. He turned away from them, and saying, oh my people, I did my job. I gave you sincere advice, but you simply do not like your sincere advice. You did not want to hear it, did not want to heed it, right? No matter how much good we want for someone, if they don't want it for themselves, we cannot help them. We can only bring a horse to water. We cannot make it drink. Like in Surah Al-Qasas, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, إِنَّكَ لَا تَهْدِي مَنْ أَحْبَبْتَ وَلَكِنَّ اللَّهَ يَهْدِي مَنْ يَشَاءُ وَهُوَ أَعْلَمُ بِالْمُهْتَدِينَ. You shall not guide the one you love, but Allah guides whomever He wills, and He is most knowing of the guided ones. And we know, of course, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is not unjust, right? He provides guidance for those who seek it, and He increases them in guidance. Like you have in Surah Maryam, verse number 76, وَيَزِيدُ اللَّهُ الَّذِينَ اهْتَدَوْا هُدًى وَالْبَاقِيَاتُ الصَّالِحَاتُ خَيْرٌ عِنْدَ رَبِّكَ ثَوَابًا وَخَيْرٌ مَرَدًّا. And we shall increase in guidance those who seek its ways, and those on the right path, and the everlasting virtues are better with your Lord in respect of reward, and better in their return. Okay, so simply wanting guidance very badly for someone, it does not in any way whatsoever bring it to them. We can want guidance for someone with all our heart and soul, we can want guidance for someone, want it to death for someone, right? That they be guided, but that desire will not make it happen, right? That desire will not make it happen. I mean, if that was the case, then, if anyone could have brought about guidance by simply wanting it dearly for someone, then it would have been Abu Talib, for whom our Rasul sallallahu alaihi wasallam deeply and badly, desperately wanted that he be guided, that he be saved. But it didn't happen, right? So, and also here we see, the same with Salih alayhi salam and his people. He sincerely wanted guidance for them. He sincerely wanted, them to adopt the right path, but they did not want it for themselves. So, if some of you were having trouble with the audio, I'll recap the main point that I made during that, is that you shall not guide the one you love, but Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala guides whomsoever He wills, right? Wanting guidance for someone does not, make it happen. It is only in the guidance has to be desired. Guidance is something that you have to want for yourself. You have to seek the ways of guidance. And of course, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is the one who guides whomsoever He wills. Okay, let's turn to verse number 80. Now, a new brief chapter with another prophet begins with verse number 80. وَلُوطًا إِذْ قَالَ لِقَوْمِهِ أَتَأْتُونَ الْفَاحِشَةَ مَا سَبَقَكُمْ بِهَا مِنْ أَحَدٍ مِنَ الْعَالَمِينَ. And remember, when we sent Lut as a messenger to his people, and he said to them, do you realize that you practice an indecency of which no other people in the world were guilty before you? Okay. Verse number 80. So here we meet Lut alayhi salam for the first time in this particular surah. This is Lut ibn Haran ibn Azar. Okay, Lut alayhi salam is mentioned 17 times in the Quran. If you were paying attention to his brief lineage that I mentioned, then remember Azar is the father of Ibrahim alayhi salam, and Lut alayhi salam is Lut ibn Haran. So Haran is the brother of Ibrahim alayhi salam. So Lut is the son of Ibrahim alayhi salam's brother, and that brother was called Haran. So therefore Lut is Lut ibn Haran. So he is the nephew of Ibrahim alayhi salam. He had believed in Ibrahim alayhi salam in Iraq when he had made his da'wah to his people. Of course, Ibrahim alayhi salam's people had rejected him. He made the hijrah from there, and Lut alayhi salam accompanied Ibrahim alayhi salam on that hijrah, and they found their way to Sham, right, to the greater Syria region. Now, Maududi rahimahullah ta'ala mentioned what I thought was a very interesting detail, so I'll share it briefly here. Maududi said that it's present day Transjordan area between Iraq, Palestine, and mentions that according to the Bible, its headquarters was Sodom. Okay, so this is a biblical account that Maududi rahimahullah ta'ala shares in his tafsir about the location of the people that Lut alayhi salam was sent to, situated somewhere near the Dead Sea or has been submerged in it. The Talmud says, and this is the Jewish reference that is being given here, it says that they had 4 more big cities besides Sodom, and the land between these cities looked like one big garden for mild and charmed the onlookers. But now those cities cannot be located with accuracy because the whole land is covered with the Dead Sea, which is also called Lot's Sea, right? The Sea of Lut alayhi salam. So this is a detail that Maududi rahimahullah ta'ala shares in his tafsir about the location of where Lut alayhi salam was sent. Now getting back directly to the verse, Lut alayhi salam is astonished at the act that his people are committing. That, how do you commit that deed which no one before you had ever ventured to do? Something that goes against the system that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has created, against the attraction, against the fitrah that He has created, against the attraction that He has naturally placed between the two sexes, out of His mercy and for the purpose of fulfilling a wise design, a wise aim for that attraction. So whenever we mess with the fitrah, we already know this from our previous study of the Quran, whenever we mess with our fitrah that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has created what we do is we go against all the benefits that society would have reaped had we stayed upon the fitrah and followed its course of action. Benefits are embedded in the fitrah and in following the commandments of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Whenever we digress from it, we also lose out on those many intended, embedded benefits. And we lead ourselves, what the really dangerous part about doing that and deviating from the fitrah and Allah's commandments is because we go down a path whose end we cannot see. And we go down a path whose end we cannot foresee. Okay, it's not within human capacity to be able to know the end game of all different paths. That's why we have been asked to, gamble and play trial and error. That's why we've been given the path, the Sirat al-Mustaqim, for optimal living, because you only have a few decades to make it and to do the best job that you can before meeting Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So He saved us from all that anguish of trial and error. And this isn't sticking to the fitrah, this is in sticking to the Sirat al-Mustaqim, to the commandments of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Because what happens with one perversion of the fitrah is that it doesn't stop there, as we've seen in the last few decades right here in our culture and society. Rather, one perversion gives birth to another. And then each has a host of social and familial complications that the first perversion could not have foreseen, and now the current situation cannot solve, right? So this is definitely an issue that we grapple with in our times and our society. It's very hard to be politically correct on this issue. We need all our faith and wisdom to, all our faith and in Islam and in the dictates of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and in His wisdom to really stand our ground on this issue. So it's definitely an issue today that may try our, iman and test it, especially in the public sphere. So really it's up to us to fortify our iman and show trust in divine legislation, not succumb to the multiple pressures that are around us to given. Okay. Now, verse 81 has a little more explicit detail about what they used to do. إِنَّكُمْ لَتَأْتُونَ الرِّجَالَ شَهْوَةً مِّن دُونِ النِّسَاءِ بَلْ أَنْتُمْ قَوْمٌ مُسْرِفُونَ. So this verse number 83, then you approach, 81 rather, you approach men lustfully in place of women. You are a people who exceed all bounds. Okay, so here's that unprecedented act mentioned slightly more explicit detail, yani coming to men to fulfill your lust and sexual desire instead of women. So he describes them as musrifin, right? Which is from israf, which means excess. So to indulge in this act in this way is something that puts you beyond all bounds. It's a transgression in terms of sexual excess. Now, what is the reply in verse number 82? وَمَا كَانَ جَوَابَ قَوْمِ إِلَّا أَنْ قَالُوا أَخْرِجُوهُمْ مِنْ قَرْيَتِكُمْ إِنَّهُمْ أُنَاسٌ يَتَطَهَّرُونَ. Their only answer was, banish them from your town. They are a people who pretend to be pure. Just get rid of them. What's the problem? Just get rid of them. This was their reply. We don't want to hear it. Get them out of here. We don't want to deal with people who consider themselves, so pure and upright and are calling us to abandon our ways and adopt their, paths of purity. We don't want to be bothered with their taqwa. Maududi rahimahullah ta'ala mentions they wanted to turn out Prophet Lut and his followers so that none should be left among them to invite to virtue. It was annoying for them to be invited to virtue, to be reminded of goodness. They did not even want that reminder. This shows how far someone can mentally go, yet how common that reaction is even today, which is then a mirror into how far we have gone mentally, right? Gone off. So I was thinking about how their reaction, interestingly, and sadly, is not very different from a very common reaction that we see all around us today. And it's perhaps best summed up in that saying, live and let live. Live and let live. Let me do whatever I want. You can do whatever you want, and let me do whatever I want, right? That's basically, the reaction immediately reminded me of this saying, like, so in modernity, today, the mentality is not very different from the people of Lut alayhi salam, right? Where desire is God. Desire is supreme. Some have said that the God of modernity is desire. Live and let live. Let me do whatever I want. Don't bother me. You do whatever you want. I'm not going to bother you. We have this silent understanding going on, right? Don't ask, don't tell. Live and let live. So, we need to start thinking, are we immune to this attitude? As Muslims, do we feel safe from adopting this attitude mentally? Or does this approach of live and let live sympathetically seep itself into us under the guise of freedom or personal choice, or give them others their space, etc., right? Don't be judgmental. How many catchphrases are there to sum up a mentality which is not very different from this reaction that we see here in the Quran, right? And what does this mean for what's perceived as freedom or personal choice in society when these clash with revelation, okay? What is that philosophy of live and let live? What is the philosophy of, personal choice is supreme and freedom is supreme? How do you square that against revelation when it clashes with revelation, right? And where as Muslims are we going to find the middle ground between the two? Is there a middle ground, right? These are questions that we need to be asking ourselves, but answering them through the Quran, right? Answering them through the Quran. That's part of this Quranic journey that we're on. Okay, so let's look at verse number 83. What happens next? فَأَنْجَيْنَاهُ وَأَهْلَهُ إِلَّا امْرَأَتَهُ كَانَتْ مِنَ الْغَابِرِينَ, right? So verse number 83, then we delivered Lut alayhi salam and his household, except his wife who stayed behind. Verse number 83, Ibn Kathir mentions how no one believed in Lut alayhi salam except his family, and even that excluded his wife. It's so sad how it was just one household that believed after Lut alayhi salam's da'wah to them, the fact that he was a messenger to them. And you have this actually in Surah Al-Dhariyat, فَأَخْرَجْنَا مَنْ كَانَ فِيهَا مِنَ الْمُؤْمِنِينَ فَمَا وَجَدْنَا فِيهَا غَيْرَ بَيْتٍ مِنَ الْمُسْلِمِينَ. This is from Surah Al-Dhariyat, verses 35 to 36, which tell us about Lut alayhi salam and the believers that were in the location he was sent to. Then before the torment, we evacuated the believers from the city, but we only found one family from among the Muslims. So there's actually corroboration of this Quranically, right? There was only that one household of Lut alayhi salam, even that excluded his wife, right? So the verses are saying that we saved him and his family except for, and this verse is saying, verse 83, that we saved him and his household except for his wife, his unfortunate wife, who was not able to benefit herself even though she was married to a prophet of God. Like, what else will benefit you if being married to the prophet of God is not going to help you, right? Hidayah is something you cannot attain unless you want it, as we just mentioned, right? It does not force itself on anyone. Guidance does not force itself on anyone. There has to be a desire for it. There has to be the intention, the desire, the seeking of it, right? You can be in the best of company and not benefit. Whose company is better than the prophets? And we see the wives both of Lut alayhi salam as well as Nuh alayhi salam, right? They both of them failed to benefit from their prophetic spouses, right? Now, what does this say to us? How does this apply to us? Well, what it tells us is that you can ward off even the best of influences that may be on you and right around you, right? I mean, who has more wisdom in their da'wah than prophets? Who can be more patient and kinder and more sincere and more exemplary in their behavior than prophets, right? Like, they don't just say, do this, do that. They actually do it themselves and show how deen and dawah is a lifestyle day in and day out. Like they show this to you, right? To us. However, as we learn from the example of these wives of, here Lut alayhi salam's wife is mentioned, we know about Nuh alayhi salam's wife as well. Somehow they found a way to remain uninspired. Isn't that what we do today when we shut out the positive influences that are around us, or we have easy access to, but just don't click on that video or that lecture, or befriend that individual, or think about that inspirational statement or that inspiring verse of the Quran or that hadith which struck a chord in my heart. We have these systems sometimes of warding off even the best and most inspiring of influences. Why do we do this? It sounds insane. Why do we do this? So we don't have to change. So we don't have to think and reflect. Because thinking and reflecting on those verses and those statements is going to force me, demand from me, a change in my behavior, right? So, human beings quickly put up their defenses and think and, try not to think for too long so that you can drown out and you can deafen yourself to just about anything you don't want to hear. And these women are a great example of that in a negative way, of course, right? What is one of the reasons people wind up in the fire of hell? They simply didn't use their faculties of listening and reasoning, right? Had they done that, had they just listened and thought about it, it would have made a lot of sense, right? And they would have believed and they would have led life of Iman that would have led them to Jannah instead of the hellfire. And if you don't believe me, just look at Surah Al-Mulk, verse 10. وَقَالُوا لَوْ كُنَّا نَسْمَعُ أَوْ نَعْقِلُ مَا كُنَّا فِي أَصْحَابِ السَّعِيرِ. And they will lament, if we only had listened and reasoned, we would not be among the residents of the blazing fire, right? So, in a sense, it can be that simple. You have to just listen and reason with the brain Allah has given us to chart out a path that saves us from the fire. But then our desires can become that deafening wall, right? That we put up as a defense, which is anything but a defense, right? Anything that exposes you to the fire is not a defense at all. Okay, let's look at verse number 84. Now what happens to them? وَأَمْطَرْنَا عَلَيْهِمْ مَطَرًا فَانْظُرْ كَيْفَ كَانَ عَاقِبَةُ الْمُجْرِمِينَ. And we let loose a shower of stones upon them. Observe then the end of the evildoers. Verse number 84. Here, the peculiar punishment that overtook the people of Lut alayhi salam is mentioned. It was a horrible rain that destroyed them, and it's an exemplary punishment that is to be pondered over how the guilty ones ended, what was their end. And this is why the verse is telling us, to look at the end of the criminals. فَانْظُرْ كَيْفَ كَانَ عَاقِبَةُ الْمُجْرِمِينَ. Look at how the end of the criminals eventually was. And in Surah Hud, you have this verse number 81, which speaks about when the angels come to Lut alayhi salam, and they come in the form of beautiful, handsome men. And remember, his people used to desire men, so they're overwhelmed with desire for these beautiful strangers. And the angels later revealed themselves, their identity to Lut alayhi salam, that they are indeed messengers of his Lord, and that the evildoers will not be able to reach them, right? So Surah Hud verse 81 means, the angels said, O Lut, we are the messengers of your Lord. They will never reach you, so travel with your family in the dark of the night, and do not let any of you look back except your wife. She will certainly suffer the fate of the others. Their appointed time is the morning not near. Okay, these are the terrifying verse from Surah Hud, verse number 81, and it continues, فَلَمَّا جَاءَ أَمْرُنَا جعلنا عاليها سافلها وامطرنا عليها حجارة من سجيل منضود مسومة عند ربك وما هي من الظالمين ببعيد. Which means when our command came, we turned the cities upside down and rained on them clustered stones of baked clay marked by your Lord, and these stones are not far from the pagan wrongdoers. So we see the rain of stones was what becomes the end of the people of Lut alayhi salam. Okay, there's only a brief mention of Lut alayhi salam here, so we can actually go on to meet the Shu'aib alayhi salam, the people of Madian, to whom Shu'aib alayhi salam was sent in verse number 85. وَإِلَى مَدْيَنَ أَخَاهُمْ شُعَيْبًا قَالَ يَا قَوْمِ اعْبُدُوا اللَّهَ مَا لَكُم مِّنْ إِلَٰهٍ غَيْرُهُ قَدْ جَاءَتْكُم بَيِّنَةٌ مِّن رَّبِّكُمْ فَأَوْفُوا الْكَيْلَ وَالْمِيزَانَ وَلَا تَبْخَسُوا النَّاسَ أَشْيَاءَهُمْ وَلَا تُفْسِدُوا فِي الْأَرْضِ بَعْدَ إِصْلَاحِهَا ذَلِكُمْ خَيْرٌ لَكُمْ إِن كُنتُم مُّؤْمِنِينَ. And to Midian we sent forth their brother Shu'aib. He exhorted them, O my people, serve Allah, you have no other God than He. Indeed, a clear proof has come to you from your Lord, so give just weight and measure and diminish not to people their things, and make no mischief on the earth after it has been set in good order. That is to your own good if you do truly believe. Okay, so to the people of Madian you have the Prophet Shu'aib alayhi salam, who was sent, and he's actually mentioned 11 times in the Quran. Ibn Kathir mentioned that Shu'aib alayhi salam is actually called the Khatib of the Anbiya, right? The Khatib, or the orator of the Anbiya, because of his great eloquence. Anyhow, Madian is, according to Ibn Kathir, refers to a tribe as well as to a location, which lays to the northwest of the Hijaz, eastern side of the Red Sea. And he also mentioned in his tafsir that the people of Madian are also referred to as Ashabul Aika, the woods, okay, the people of the woods. So you have Ashabul Aika in the Quran as well. So he says that they're actually the same people. If you look up in the Atlas of the Quran, it's a really cool book which documents Quranic places and nations and landmarks. It actually mentions that Madian is a land of softwood trees. Okay, so the same message of Tawheed that unifies all prophets is the same message that Shu'aib alayhi salam brings to his people, and he is the one who says the same thing that Salih alayhi salam has said to his people in terms of the bayyinah, that a clear proof has come to you from your Lord. But of course, in the case of Salih alayhi salam, it was the she-camel that was sent to the people of Thamud. But in this case, in the case of Madian, to whom Shu'aib alayhi salam is sent, the bayyinah has come from their Lord, yani Allah has presented the proof and the evidences of the truth that I have brought before you. Okay, so there's no she-camel here, but there is the proofs and the evidences that are going to be explained and conveyed by Shu'aib alayhi salam. Now, the people of Madian were great traders. Their habitations were right at the crossroads of their trade routes, and they were actually people that continued to be remembered even after their extermination, okay, because they were such great traders and were famous for that. And Maududi rahimahullah ta'ala, he mentions how it's very interesting that these people used to claim descent from Midian, who is a son of Ibrahim alayhi salam, from his third wife Qatura. And so Shu'aib alayhi salam is reminding them, you claim to be believers, you claim this great descent from this great prophet. Well, you should be fair and equitable in your business dealings. You should not shortchange people and steal from them stealthily. So the clarity, the bayyinah that Shu'aib alayhi salam had brought should have inspired this ethical behavior in his people directly. He reminds them not to spread corruption in the land, something that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala hates, right? And adopting this upright attitude that I'm telling you is what befits you and is better for you if you indeed are believers, because remember, they claim to be believers, okay? So he addresses them in this way. And the way Maududi rahimahullah ta'ala explains this is that they had originally been Muslim, like the Bani Israel to whom Musa alayhi salam was sent. They had originally been, they were originally Muslim as well, right? So in that same way, these people had already been originally Muslim but had become corrupt. When Shu'aib alayhi salam was sent to them, they'd become involved in shirk and immoralities by mixing with the mushriks and the immoral people during the 6 centuries after Ibrahim alayhi salam. But Maududi says that they professed to be believers, they were proud of being believers. So then this is the aspect that Shu'aib alayhi salam focuses on, that okay, if you are claiming this great descent from this great prophet, claiming that you're believers, then that should show in your behavior. So the first evil that Shu'aib alayhi salam was sent to reform was their shirk, and their dishonesty in trade was the other thing, right? And we see in verse 86, there's actually a little bit more clarity given in verse 86. For the sake of time, we'll just read the translation. And do not lie in ambush by every path of life, seeking to overawe or to hinder those who believe from the path of Allah, nor seek to make the path crooked. Okay, so verse number 86, which concludes with, remember how you were once few and then He multiplied you, and keep in mind what was the end of the mischief makers. Okay, so Ibn Kathir mentions that in fact they used to threaten the people with murder. They would be on the streets, on the way that the people would be passing on. They would threaten them with murder if they didn't hand over their wealth to them. So they were actually bandits, according to one report. So again, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala calls them to remember, or rather it is the Prophet Shu'aib alayhi salam calling them to remember Allah's favors upon them, how they used to be few in number and how He strengthened them. And also remember the divine wrath that those that did not heed the call had to face at the end. Those who sowed corruption had nothing but divine wrath to face. So He also reminds them about that. And we're just going to conclude with verse number 87 for today. And if there are some among you who believe in the message that I bear, while some do not believe, have patience till Allah should judge between us. He is the best of those who judge. Okay, so basically He's saying don't be deluded or confused by the fact that some people have believed in the message and others have not believed in the message that I have been sent with. Don't let this phenomena of, kufr puzzle you, that why is it that everyone is not believing. Don't be puzzled by this. And I found this so applicable to us today. It's relevant to all of us, adults and youth and children alike, right? Sometimes it becomes very confusing, especially for the youth, how many people disbelieve in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, reject God, and they just go about their daily lives unharmed, very successful, very wealthy. First world nations, they lead the world stage, right? With their advancements, they're heroes of the global stage. As well as in the area of, ideas and ideologies. Unfortunately, when it comes to religion, the trend in our modern world is towards doubt and towards skepticism and towards questioning, right? And this is something that we get in the aftermath of, various developments in a modern European and American, society. So the trend overall is to a decreased importance of the role of religion in the political sphere, the economic sphere, and there's this cherished ideal of separation between church and state. So the political sphere is not informed by deen, but it is led by democracy. The economic models don't reflect, dictates of divine enlightenment, but they are molded in the grasp of capitalism, right? Or in the grasp of capitalism. So the point is that our world, as we know it today, economically, politically, socially, is not molded according to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, what He says. And people seem to be doing fine, apparently, right? They're the first world countries. They're, the leaders of innovation and technology, right? Let us not be disillusioned and confused by this temporary success and glamour. We need to study the truth and believe in it with conviction. That is the only way to take away that confusion, that doubt, and that lack of understanding. And if that's too much work, and we opt to choose the lazy course of continued confusion instead of actively seeking clarity, then we can just be patient, right? Until Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala judges between those who believed and those who didn't believe, because this is what Shuaib alayhi salam says at the end, right? Then, have patience till Allah should judge between us, right? If we are confused and want to stay confused and don't seek clarity through active study and getting the answers for our questions through a proper Quranic study, then the path of confusion is one that we will stay in and until Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala judges between the believers and those who did not. And He is the best of judges. Then He will tell us what pleased Him, godliness or worldliness, iman or kufr, conviction or doubt. So inshallah, with that, we conclude this section with verse number 87. Inshallah, I hope to see all of you back next Wednesday for our final class of this semester before the winter break. سبحانك وبحمدك لا إله إلا أنت نستغفرك ونتوب إليك. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته.